She didn't scream. When the guards came at dawn, their boots echoing like war drums through the stone corridors of the tower, Anne Boleyn didn't cry or beg. She stood, straightened her dress, and smiled. Faint, thin, sharp as the blade she was about to meet. In a kingdom where whispers killed faster than blades, Anne's final silence was louder than any confession. You've heard the sanitized version, the elegant queen, the noble speech, the clean strike, but history lies to make monsters digestible. The truth? Her death was a masterpiece of political theater, choreographed, rehearsed, and sharpened to cut more than just flesh. And if you think you've heard it all, stay, like this video, subscribe. Because Anne Boleyn didn't just die, she was destroyed. It began before the sun. Inside the Tower of London, the corridors were colder than usual. A stillness clung to the walls, as if the stone itself held its breath. Anne hadn't slept. Her ladies, pale and silent, had helped her dress. A simple gray gown, no jewels, no crown, just a white coif over her dark hair, modest, almost nun-like. Outside, the scaffold had already been raised. The crowd was gathering. Nobles elbowed for better positions. Soldiers held back commoners hungry for spectacle. A French executioner waited quietly, his sword hidden in straw, imported from Calais days before, handpicked by Henry himself. No English axe for this queen, no brutal hacking, just one perfect stroke, quick and theatrical. She knew this wasn't justice. The charges, adultery, incest, treason, had been assembled with the precision of a man arranging his divorce through blood. Her brother, George, was already dead. Her alleged lovers, all executed. She'd been tried by men who once praised her for birthing the future of England. Now they smiled politely as she signed her death. And still, she walked. She walked past the Chapel Royal, past the guards who would not meet her eyes, past the place where she had once been crowned queen. Now it was the road to her erasure. The sky was gray, windless, as if nature, too, refused to move forward. Anne Boleyn stepped onto the scaffold, her hands folded in prayer, her eyes scanning the crowd, not for pity, but to hold their gaze, to remind them she was still Anne, not just a queen. A warning. Before she was the woman everyone wanted silenced, she was the woman everyone wanted near. Anne Boleyn didn't begin with power. She wasn't born into a crown. She earned proximity to it with wit, with education, with a confidence that unsettled men and fascinated them in equal measure. In the court of Henry VIII, where beauty was common but danger was rare, Anne was both. She arrived not as a royal bride, but as a lady-in-waiting, first in the Netherlands, then in France. She spoke fluent French, read philosophy, understood courtly nuance better than most advisors. Where others bowed, she measured. Where others flirted, she calculated. Henry noticed. At first, she refused him, politely, then firmly. She would not be his mistress. He had one already, her own sister, Mary. Anne demanded more, and by doing so, she became not an object of desire, but an obsession. For 7 years, Henry pursued her. Letters, gifts, promises of marriage, all while still tied to his wife, Catherine of Aragon. But Anne didn't just tempt the king. She changed him. She made him wait. She made him fight. And in doing so, she pulled an empire apart. It was Anne who stood behind Henry as he broke from Rome, who whispered into his ear as he redefined the church, who watched as England turned its back on the Pope, all for the promise of a crown placed on her head. When their marriage was finally declared, when Anne was crowned queen in 1533, she wasn't just replacing Catherine. She was rewriting the rules of who could wear a crown. But power breeds isolation. And Anne made enemies quickly. She was too sharp, too proud, too unwilling to play submissive queen. She interrupted, she advised, she demanded to be heard. And while Henry loved her rebellion in private, it made him flinch in public. Still, she gave him what he'd risked everything for: a child, a daughter. Not the son he wanted, not the heir the kingdom expected, but a daughter who would one day be named Elizabeth I. The irony, of course, was that the child they deemed a failure would become England's most enduring monarch. But in the moment, Anne's moment, it wasn't enough. The shift didn't come as thunder. It came as silence. One day, Henry stopped visiting her chambers. Another day, a gift didn't arrive. Then came whispers, quiet, oily things that slipped between courtiers like smoke. Anne was too proud, too loud. She had failed to give the king a son. She was too close to reformist advisors. She was not the wife England needed. Her greatest weapon, her voice, was now recast as a threat. And then she miscarried. January 1536. She was carrying a son, her redemption, the answer to every doubt, every sneer behind fans and folded parchments. But the baby was lost. The child came too early, dead, malformed, lifeless. Some say the fall happened after she saw Henry with Jane Seymour. Others say it was just chance. But the child was gone, and with it, her last shield. From that moment, Anne wasn't a queen. She was a liability. Thomas Cromwell moved quickly. Once her ally, now her architect of doom. He began to assemble charges: treason, adultery, even incest, with a clarity that only fear produces. Anne wasn't just to be removed. She was to be obliterated. No legacy, no martyrdom, just scandal, shame, and silence. They accused her of seducing her own brother, George Boleyn, of laying with 4 men at court, of mocking the king's poetry, of plotting his death with her lovers. The dates of these alleged affairs were often absurd, days when she was known to be in other castles or recovering post-pregnancy. It didn't matter. The trial was already written. The men accused with her were tortured or tricked into confessions. George, her brother, was executed, calm, composed, but unable to save her. The others followed, their names reduced to footnotes in a story that had no room for nuance. Anne stood trial at the Tower, alone, pregnant with rage, surrounded by men who had once toasted her ascension. She denied every charge. Her voice rang in that cold stone room, measured, unshaken. But the verdict had been decided before the doors opened. She was sentenced to death. Not as a queen, as a traitor. They let her wait. After the sentence, Anne wasn't taken to the scaffold. Not yet. She was returned to her quarters in the Tower, small, spare, cold, and told the executioner would arrive in 2 days. Then 3, then 4. It was deliberate. Each morning she awoke thinking it would be her last. Each night she went to sleep still alive, her breath tight in her chest, her neck unconsciously tensed. That kind of waiting wasn't mercy. It was psychological erosion. Anne wrote letters. One to Henry, measured, even kind. She asked only for her debts to be paid and her name not to be defiled. She never begged. She never apologized. She signed it simply, "Your most loyal and ever constant Anne." The guard spoke of her calm, of how she prayed, laughed even, joked darkly with her ladies. "I have heard," she said once, "that the executioner is very good, and I have a little neck." But inside, her world was collapsing. Her daughter, Elizabeth, had been declared illegitimate. Her marriage annulled, her name stripped from records. Everything she'd built, through charm, through intelligence, through sheer defiance, was being erased, not by fire, but by ink. The court had moved on. Henry was already courting Jane Seymour. Plans were being made for a new queen. The noble smiled again. The court breathed easier. Anne's absence was not a loss. It was convenience. Finally, on the morning of May 19th, 1536, they came for her. She dressed carefully. A red petticoat beneath a gray gown, a tight white coif. No jewels, no emblems, nothing to distract. She looked like a widow, because in many ways she already was, not of a man, but of her own identity. The scaffold was quiet, smaller than she expected. Cleaner. The crowd packed tight, hungry but hushed. Her ladies cried, but Anne didn't. She walked up the steps as if she were entering court again, tall and composed. She gave a final speech. Not of guilt or innocence, but of loyalty. She praised Henry, called him a good and gracious king, said she prayed for him, said she forgave her enemies. It wasn't submission, it was precision. Anne knew her death would be watched, written, remembered. She controlled every word of her exit. She knelt. The French executioner, specially brought for his sword work, stood ready, his blade hidden behind his back, his face expressionless. Anne whispered a final prayer and waited for the blow that would make her immortal. The sword was hidden. The Frenchman didn't raise it high or drag the moment. He waited until Anne's eyes were closed, until her mouth moved softly in prayer, until the hush around the scaffold became unbearable. Then he called to his assistant, loudly. Anne turned her head instinctively, and in that precise moment the blade moved. No sound, no warning, no struggle, just a flash, and then silence. Her head fell forward onto the straw, the coif still white, the eyes still open. The body slumped. Blood darkened the boards. The crowd exhaled all at once, a collective breath they hadn't realized they were holding. It was over. The executioner stepped back, bowed. The sword returned to its leather wrap. The body was gathered quickly, without ceremony. Her ladies, trembling, wrapped the head and torso in white cloth. There was no coffin, only a chest, brought from the Tower's kitchens. It had once carried arrows. Now it carried a queen. She was buried beside her brother in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, within the Tower grounds. No marker, no monument, just stone, just dirt, just absence. Henry wasn't there. He was preparing for his wedding to Jane Seymour. It would happen 10 days later, a quiet ceremony. He would wear white. England would receive a new queen, and the court would act as if Anne had never been. But she remained, in portraits erased, in letters burned, in a daughter cast aside, and eventually in rumors that her ghost walked the Tower, that her eyes still searched the scaffold, that her lips still moved in the last prayer, unfinished. Because Anne Boleyn didn't vanish. She lingered, not just in history books, but in the collective memory of a kingdom that had watched a woman be built into a crown, then broken beneath it. And centuries later, people still ask the same thing. Was she guilty? But that's the wrong question. The right one is, why was her death so carefully arranged to look clean while everything around it reeked of rot?